Welcome into week 3, the Football Guys DFS show. We are back. We are ready for week 3 slate. We have the cash games and your GPP plays for both DraftKings and FanDuel. Special emphasis on DraftKings. But I know we need to start with some business. We've got our dynasty captain, not dynasty captain. Well, I'm the dynasty captain, but our DFS captain, Devin Knotts, is going to start off here. And he's going to award, because we had a jersey winner last week because we met a goal.
Yeah, so where is it? Jonathan Wilkes-KZ7DT. What a name. You won a free jersey. So contact me, knotts@footballguys.com. We'll get you all settled up. We'll have you make a comment with a keyword underneath just to make sure you're legit. But we're going to do another giveaway. What should we make the like goal? We did 247 last week. Let's go 225 sounds pretty good. 225 likes, and you'll win another jersey this week. So let's do.
What do the people need to do to win that jersey, Devin?
Yeah, let's do Deshaun Watson's DraftKings points this week.
Deshaun Watson's DraftKings points. The Browns are playing the Giants this week. Nice. So we saw Watson with the rushing touchdown last week. So and you can win any jersey you want.
Any jersey, any size, any team.
All right. And I know we talked a little bit pre-show. You wanted to start off talking a little bit of strategy this week, talking about late swaps. And let's dive into that. How are you handling these late swaps?
Yeah, I tweeted it out last week. I think it's important that if you are drawing dead or off to a slow start, you make adjustments on the fly. And last week, Cooper Kupp was going to be highly, highly rostered. I was pretty far behind. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to throw Nico Collins in on FanDuel, Marvin Harrison on DraftKings because I need upside and it's an easy swap down to one of those guys. It ended up working out really well for me. It saved my week. Didn't crush it, but ended up doing okay and making a lot of my money back. So as we think about each and every week, really focus in on how is my lineup doing compared to my opponents? Can I make adjustments? Because that late swap feature is there and you can ultimately make adjustments and potentially save your week.
Now, would you go the other way if you were off to a hot start and you had faded a player that you would expect high ownership on? Would you swap into that to kind of protect yourself?
In a cash game setting, I think I would. I think you could also look at it as, hey, I'm off to a really hot start, but there's one or two people ahead of me and they have a similar position as me. So I'm going to still move away from the really high rostered player. So that's the route I would go, but go to Phil for the games while I get my internet figured out.
Yeah. Phil, what are the games of the week that you're watching this week to set our slates?
Yeah, sure thing. This week, I'm actually not going to rattle off like half of the slate because it's pretty ugly outside of a few choice games. I think the best one that we got going for us is Lions at Cardinals. The Lions are a road favorite in that one, 52-point total. Then we've got Eagles at Saints, the red hot Saints who could do no wrong. That one's at a 49-point total. Saints favored by 3. That line swung after the Eagles' Monday night debacle. So that's an interesting one. Then we've got a pair of games that are not quite as enticing as those first two, but Texans at Vikings has a 46.5-point total. We know the Texans have an explosive offense, and the Vikings look rejuvenated, as does their quarterback, Sam Darnold. Ravens at Cowboys has a 48-point total. Cowboys coming off of a shellacking at home against the Saints, looking to bounce back with the Ravens also coming off of a rough home loss against the Raiders of all teams. But Vegas likes that one for some points, and so do I. And then I only have one game in the somewhat interesting column, and that is 49ers at Rams, mostly the 49ers side, as they're 7-point favorites on the road, and the Rams have kind of completely fallen apart.
You're not going to name every game, but you're going to name every game we want to talk about. Devin, do you have any other ones that you want to go to?
No. No,
I
Phil
think
covered it as usual.
the only other one that kind of stood out to me was maybe the Seahawks side of the Seahawks Miami game. That's a very long road trip for Miami, and obviously everything going on with Tua Tagovailoa last week's game up to Seattle, and Seattle showed that they could put up some big plays, especially they actually got the ball to their good wide receivers this week as opposed to Tyler Lockett in week 1. But no, and we can move into our cash game plays then. We can start off with quarterbacks. And Devin, how are you handling quarterbacks and cash this week?
Yeah, I think cash it's another pay down week for me. And I think there's a couple guys really in that like 53 to 5,600 range. I mentioned Deshaun Watson. He played better last week, but I don't know that I trust it just because Amari Cooper just looks off. And Amari Cooper's had like 3 or 4 really bad drops. Hasn't had the separation that you would like to see him have. I think Jerry Jeudy is actually a pretty good play this week. And then Gardner Minshew, he's another one that's cheap, but Carolina, like, do you really need to throw the ball against them? So I'm probably not going that route. I think it really comes down to whether or not Justin Jefferson plays, because if he does, I think Sam Darnold for me is the cash game play. If he doesn't, I think I'm going Justin Fields at 5,400. I mean, look, Fields is off to a 2-0 start. He's played well, but he hasn't had one of those breakout games. And with Russell Wilson coming back, I mean, this is a game where they're going to need him to continue to put up points. Last week, it seemed like they were just kind of grinding out a win against Denver. But at 5,400, getting that rushing upside certainly is intriguing for me. But it really comes down to the health of Jefferson this week.
Yeah, and Fields is the type of player that we know that you can break one play and be able to make your week there. But yeah, it's definitely been muted fantasy production relative to what we've come to expect from him. Phil, are you operating in the same tier here on your cash game lineups, or are you looking to spend up a little bit?
Same tier, yes, but not the same players. I think that what I was saying last week about Justin Fields kind of bared some fruit, and that's that like Arthur Smith is just not going to let him do Justin Fields stuff. Unfortunately, it's a sad reality that I'm coping with, but we need him playing backyard football in order to really get the Justin Fields experience, and I don't know that we're going to see it for as long as it's working for Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin. My quarterback in that tier was Geno Smith. Jeff, you mentioned it earlier that Seattle is 5-point favorites at home. They've got a broken Miami team coming to visit, and Geno Smith is playing stellar football right now. Above 70% completion rate in both games, long completions of at least 30 yards in both games. From a ceiling perspective, you have to wonder if Skylar Thompson is going to be up to the task of keeping Smith busy for all 4 quarters. But from a floor perspective, as a 5-point home favorite and with the receivers he's got and being on the roll that he's coming in on, I think he gets you 18 to 20 without batting an eye. And I would go for him. The only other guy that I would consider is Kyler Murray, but he's 6,900. And given the context of the rest of the slate, I don't see how we could get there just yet.
Derek Carr, 5,800. It's an election year. And when do we talk about him in cash, or are we just keeping him for GPP still?
I mean, I don't know. The problem is there's like Kamara's still there, and with his 4 touchdowns last week, do I really trust Derek Carr? No. Like he certainly has upside, but to me, he's like the white, less mobile Deshaun Watson. Better guy for sure, but he has the upside to have 300 yards, but he could have like 177 yards and a touchdown and throw the ball 19 times. Like, I don't know. I think there's just too much risk there for me.
Yeah, I certainly hear that in cash. But you mentioning Alvin Kamara, that's a nice segue into diving into running backs. And Phil, are you looking to build lineups around Kamara? Are you kind of operating? And we have the Jordan Mason, Jordan Mason Memorial cheap play of the week, and Mason is starting to get a little bit priced up. But where are you going here with running backs?
Yeah, he's getting priced up, Jordan Mason, but not nearly enough. He's still at just 6,200, and I was thinking like the algorithm's a little bit broken on him because I think 20 carries, 100 yards, and a touchdown. I realize it's not his floor, but I honestly don't think it's far off of his floor. I mean, the guy's got 98% of the 49ers carries through 2 games. We've got Debo Samuel out now, so that frees up some additional rushing attempts. And we've got the 49ers favored by a touchdown against a really lousy defense. So I think Mason is the free square the same way that he was last week. Alvin Kamara is a little bit too expensive for me, and the same way that the efficiency might fall out the bottom on Derek Carr, I think the same thing is liable to happen to Alvin Kamara one of these weeks.
Don't you think that? I mean, the Eagles were so bad on Monday night, though. Like they have major issues.
They do.
And like Bijan Robinson showed how to beat this team, and it's on the ground. I don't think 7,500 is that prohibitive this week, but keep going. We can talk through it.
I think he's fine, but the way that I had set things up, I liked Zach Charbonnet for a second straight week. We don't know if Kenneth Walker is officially out yet, but it's not looking good. There was no practice for him today. There was a Twitter video that leaked of him kind of gingerly running at like 50% speed and grabbing his abdominal area. The Seahawks did add Miles Boykin and Britton Brown to the practice squad. Also, not a good sign for Walker playing this week. So it was mediocre last week. Charbonnet,
he's not good at football, and that's like the first time I've said that in like 5 years. He's bad. Like he's a guy who's 14 carries for like 29 yards every single time he gets an opportunity.
It's kind of true. It's kind of true, but yeah, that's the thing. I mean, in cash games, I'm looking for workload, right? And here we have a running back playing on a team that's at home, pretty heavy favorite that was in on all but 3 snaps last week. He ran 34 pass routes, which is like more than a lot of teams' wide receivers get to run on a weekly basis. Secured 5 targets, so that plays on DraftKings where it's full PPR. And yeah, he needed the touchdown to pay off, but I think he's got a pretty good probability of getting that touchdown again this week. And the only other player, and this guy is not in the lineup that I created for cash yet. I was trying to find ways to kind of do some lineup gymnastics and get him in there. But on the other side of that game, you've got Devon Achane at 7,000. And the outlook is bleak for the Dolphins. You've got Skylar Thompson coming in to play quarterback. You usually don't want a running back in cash that's on a big road underdog, but I think Achane is mispriced. I was shocked that they saddled him up for 29 touches last week in a game that he entered questionable. And then they kept feeding him after it was no longer competitive. So they're clearly trusting him with large workloads. They think that he gives them the best shot at moving the ball. That's definitely going to be the case with Skylar Thompson, who's going to operate close to the line of scrimmage. Wouldn't shock me if he sees more than the 7 targets he's gotten in each of the first 2 games this week. And we know that he's a threat to take it to the house anytime that he touches the ball. So I think HN is cash worthy. I just don't see a path to getting him into my lineup.
I think there was some situation involved with that Achane usage because I believe Jeff Wilson was ruled out of that game after about 1 touch. And then it just kind of didn't seem like there was a lot of trust with Jalen right there. And I believe Raheem Mostert was close to being able to go. And with a long week, they probably played it more conservative there. So if Mostert's back, I don't know that Achane's going to get that type of usage, but I hear you. And definitely it was very interesting in the fourth quarter that he was still very, very heavily involved.
Yeah. And that is contingent on Mostert because I'm not sure exactly what's happening with that injury. I don't know if he was back to practice today or not.
Devin, you teased Kamara a little bit. How are you building your running back cash team lineups?
Yeah, I think Mason, at least on DraftKings, on FanDuel, he's 8,300, and for the first time in like a long time, FanDuel actually has a better price player than DraftKings. This is a major screw up by DraftKings to have him at 6,200 for the third straight week. Not at 6,200, but being as cheap as he is for the third straight week. So he's a lock. He's the lock and load. Kamara, I think, is in a really good spot. The Eagles, their front seven just looked horrific. They largely built themselves around these like big DTs, these older defensive line, and they're extremely young this season. So outside of Brandon Graham, who's like 39 years old, but more of just a pass rusher at this point, extremely young. So I think that the Saints continue to see the game plan that New Orleans or Atlanta had and try to run the ball against Philly. Tony Pollard at 6K is really interesting. Green Bay's defense is allowing 5.1 yards per carry so far this year. Pollard, from a touch perspective, like he faced a difficult Bears defense, he faced a difficult Jets defense, and he had 19 and 22 touches while still averaging 4.4 yards per carry, catching 4 passes per game. So I think it's 6K in by far his most favorable matchup that he's had so far this year is a really good price. And then if you're looking to punt, this one's ugly, really ugly. But Indianapolis's run defense has been like it's trending to be the Panthers of 2023, where you just play the running back. And I know that it's only 2 games in, so it's maybe the Panthers are just the Panthers again, and we need to play. God, my mind is just broken. Whoever the Panthers are, Zamir White, but Zamir White is another Zach Charbonnet-esque player. Indy allowed 159 yards and a touchdown to Joe Mixon, 151 yards to Josh Jacobs. I see a world where DeAndre Swift has a breakout game and they try to make things easier for Caleb Williams, who's clearly struggling by establishing the run in a favorable matchup this week.
Cole Kmet's going to be excited the next time you guys play golf, because that's as close as mentioning a Chicago Bear that we're probably going to get on this episode, given how their offense has struggled. But that's a good call out. He was.
According to you guys, I'm not going to be alive by the next time I play golf with him because I'm a Make-A-Wish patient.
Zamir White, I did want to mention him because there was a comment coming out of last game. They said they wanted to get him the ball 20 times, and they said, well, you're a little bit short this week, but our goal is to get the ball to Zamir White 20 times, playing Carolina this week at 5,500. That's pretty far down there. Contingent play, but Joe Mixon has been out of practice, and Dameon Pierce has been out of practice, and you've got Cam Akers sitting here at 4,700 and a quote unquote a revenge game against his Minnesota Vikings last week, and then 4,000 on FanDuel there too for Akers. And I mean, I feel like that if Mixon, and especially Mixon and Pierce, are both out, I think Cam Akers probably is in every lineup, I would have to imagine. The other thing that we saw, that injury to Isaiah Pacheco on FanDuel, you can play that Chiefs game. You do have Carson Steele if you want to get a little bit risky, sitting at 5,200 on FanDuel there, but that's, you don't know how it's going to work out there. But we'll go on our wide receivers, Devin, and tell me how you're going to get the revenge matchup with Stephon Diggs going up against Minnesota Vikings in your lineup.
I'm not. I don't know. It's too many mouths to feed there, and Diggs is playing like he was very encouraging for Nico Collins going off, which I don't like to see that. I want to see angry Stephon Diggs with a second-year quarterback. So he's like, I don't know. I not really going that route this week. Wide receiver's tough. Like, there's not the must-start play this week, and it's only Wednesday, so things obviously change, but I think there's a lot of GPP plays, but there's not necessarily that like cash game, lock it up. Here's the guy that you have to start this week. So compared to last week, where most lineups looked relatively similar, this week is going to look very different. You're going to have people that are playing Zach Charbonnet, and you're going to have people that are playing Carson Steele, and you're going to have people like going really cheap at that position so that they can pay up at wide receiver or tight end. I'm sort of going with like the middle of the road type scenario. And, I think a couple guys that stand out to me this week, Devonta Smith at 6,900. I really liked what I saw going up against with Philly going up against Atlanta. With no AJ Brown, I think he's going to be Dallas Goedert is like non-existent in that offense right now. So I think it's largely going to be the Devontae Smith and Saquon Barkley show. So he's probably the top of my list. I don't know what to do with Chris Godwin. Like, the guy has as many touchdowns this year as he did in all of last year. And if he gets one more, he has more than he's had in the last 3 years. I tend to believe like he's going to be popular. Should he be popular? I don't know. But he's had 2 favorable matchups in a row. Denver's defense does scare me a little bit just because how much do you need to throw against them? Like, teams that are playing them are just grinding out these wins. So probably not going there. The other name that I'm looking at is Deontay Johnson at 4,900. With Andy Dalton this week, we saw Adam, what was it, last year with Adam Thielen, where he became like relevant when Dalton came in. It might have been 2 years ago now.
It was last year.
Last year.
Yeah, I think it's another scenario where like they paid a lot to get Deontay Johnson in the offseason. He was their big acquisition. The team needs to define like what offense they actually are. And at 4,900, I think it's a really good price for a guy who's been largely a PPR machine throughout his career. And then the last name I'll throw out there, and I really want to play Jerry Jeudy, but I'm not going to. The last name I'll throw out there is Rashid Shaheed for New Orleans. If you're not going to play Kamara, I think this is a high-scoring game against Philly, and Shaheed's looked good so far this year. So Philly's defense doesn't scare me. Drake London had a pretty good game last week, so I think that Shaheed could definitely have another good game this week.
Phil, who else are you looking at, or do you like those plays?
I like some of them. I like most of them. The reason that
Tell me why you don't like them. It's okay. You don't have to own like picks.
They're pretty good picks. I mean, I'll get into them if you'd like, but here's the deal. I was curious to see what you guys thought about Deontay Johnson at 4,900 because the way that I was making my build, I was going to end up with one receiver or a flex that was going to be in that either low 4,000 or high 4,000 area. I wasn't sure how much of a leap of faith Deontay Johnson is with Andy Dalton and if we needed to see it first. And that's still something that I'm kind of playing with mentally. So I'm glad to hear Devin is confident. It should happen, right? Dalton is ever so slightly above league average at quarterback or maybe right on the line. And that's enough, I think, to feed a target like Deontay Johnson. So
he's like 10 times better than Bryce Young. So if Deontay Johnson had 2 catches with Bryce Young, he's going to have 20 catches.
He'll have 20.
That's the way math works. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're playing Devontae Smith, and I think we are, I mean, he dominated targets in that Monday night game. He had 10. Barkley was the next closest Eagle with 5. We're going to see that keep up without AJ Brown there. So yes, I do think you lock him in. And that leaves, if I flex Deontay Johnson, I'm right in that middle of the road neighborhood at my other 2 spots. And where I was looking was Brandon Ayuk at 6,200. Shout out to Football Guys alum Dwayne McFarland. He had a good tweet that he shared today. He said, over the last 3 seasons in games Deebo Samuel has missed, Ayuk has a 29% target share, 45% air yard share, and averages 2.92 yards per route run. Those are high-end wide receiver 1 metrics, no matter how you slice them. And Ayuk is keeping company with like Michael Pittman and Amari Cooper price-wise on DraftKings. And those guys like can't get off the struggle bus. I think without Samuel in the lineup, Ayuk is in a good spot again, especially against that Rams defense. And then see if I play Charbonnet instead of Kamara, I have more money for wide receiver 3, and I could improve, I think, Shaheed to Chris Olave. Now, that's a little bit of a questionable call because Shaheed's been outperforming Olave, and he might just be the better cash game play at
Can you
$1,000 less,
$100
like
because I
Devin
have a
said.
better receiver who's $100 more.
Who's that?
Malik Neighbors, 6,400.
I don't know. Malik Neighbors against Cleveland. I mean, so far we've got Neighbors underwhelming against the Vikings, who are like an average defense, maybe slightly above average. We had him killing Washington, the worst defense in the league. And now we have Cleveland, who I think is at least closer in quality to the Vikings, if not better when
Average
they're
defense.
firing on all cylinders. So I don't know. Before I go back to Neighbors, I have to see him
18
perform.
targets last week.
Washington, I like is Daniel Jones. He's like a misstep away from who is it? Drew Lock coming in and playing quarterback over there. I mean, it's very realistic, I think. So, see, I wasn't sure if Olave was controversial, but he perked up last week. He had 4 catches for 81 yards on 6 targets. Those 6 targets, by the way, amounted to a 43% share of the team total, right? It just so happened that the game was over in the first quarter and they didn't need to throw later on in the game. The Eagles' front 7 looked bad. Their secondary didn't look good either, especially late in the game when they were trying to defend Mooney and London for the Falcons. So I don't know. One of those Saints receivers belongs in your lineup. That's all I'm thinking. I think Olave has more talent. I think it's going to happen for him before long. And just as an aside, if you need another $700, I would get a little riskier. I think Jordan Whittington at 4,200 might be in play, even though we don't know what the snaps and the routes are going to look like from a playing time standpoint. If there's one guy on that Rams receiver roster that Sean McVay could scheme the ball to in the short areas of the field because that offensive line is a wreck, and ask him to do some work after the catch, I think it's Jordan Whittington. He's only 4,200. I have him projected for about 10 DraftKings points, which I would take if it meant that I could get the rest of the lineup that I want. So Deontay and Whittington were the 2 that I was debating in the low end.
I think even with Jordan Mason, I think Brandon Ayuk at 6,200 with Deebo Samuel out of the lineup is a must play. And George Kittle's questionable there. I really like that value. Jackson Smith and Jigba had 16 targets last week at 5,400. And that's really tempting to me that if he's going to see, I can't imagine he gets 16 targets again, but at 5,400, that's a lot there on that vine that he can go attack there. Then Jameson Williams at 5,800. Jameson Williams has the 5th most targets, and we saw Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of get back to being Amon-Ra St. Brown in week 2 and heavily target volume, but Jameson Williams was still very involved, and Amon-Ra St. Brown is banged up at 5,800 going up against the Cardinals in the potential shootout game. I really like that one quite a bit too. But
Jeff, the Homer Buckeye.
Tell you what, he's a traitor a little bit, but yeah,
naming 2 Buckeyes.
Yeah, I did name 2 Buckeyes there. But we had a bounce back in after the Buckeyes combined to catch 3 passes in week 1. Week 2 was all about Buckeye receivers. So there we go. But we can dive into tight ends now. And to me, the tight end list is looking pretty short this week. But Devin, is it similar for you, or are you looking at anything else in tight ends?
No, I mean, it's pretty small. I think it's look, I've talked about it this year. Not really wanting to pay down at tight end so far, at least. There's not been that guy that like, hey, all of a sudden I'm comfortable playing at 3K or 2,500. I will say that like this scares me because Brock Bowers is my top guy this week, and they should be able to do whatever they want against Carolina. 9 targets and 8 targets. 98 yards against Baltimore, 58 yards against the Chargers in his first 2 games. If there's a week he's going to score a touchdown, like you should be up enough against this Carolina team that you should be able to scheme Brock Bowers a touchdown. Other than that, like it's just a bunch of guys for me. There's not really that like Mark Andrews and Trey McBride are just not difference makers for me. Trey McBride's yards per catch it scares me over his career, especially with Marvin Harrison taking some of that downfield threat. I know he had a better game last week than he did in week 1 with 6 for 67, but he caught all 6 of his targets. So is he a guy that's going to have that upside that you're looking for in McBride? I don't know. But Phil, is there anybody else that you're targeting here?
Not really. I would say if you could scrounge up an extra $300 by, switching to a lower defense or something, maybe you go George Kittle. But at that point, me personally, I would end up with 3 49ers in my lineup. And I guess I feel a little bit better about that than I did last week about 3 Rams in my lineup, but that didn't work out. So not really looking to go there again. And I think Bowers is a great play for all the reasons you mentioned. Andy Dalton isn't going to play defense, right? So Carolina is still that team that you want to target your players against. They let both Saints tight ends into the end zone in week 1. So like Devin said, there's some pretty good touchdown potential there. And Bowers leads all tight ends in targets, receptions, and receiving yards through 2 games. I don't see any reason to fade him in cash.
The only other name I'll throw out there is Ferguson at 4,500. And if he returns this week, I think the price is just a little bit too low. He left the game early against Cleveland and didn't really perform. But this is a guy who was second in red zone targets last year for tight ends, so they need a second guy to step up there.
So I say this with the caveat of it would be the first game back, and I think the Titans are a little bit better than defensively than maybe we think in our mind. But if Jordan Love plays, the Packers are mispriced. The Packers receiving options are mispriced if Jordan Love's on the field. And Tucker Kraft at 3,200. Tucker Kraft played almost every single snap week 1 with Jordan Love. That at 3,200 is the only cheap option that I would look at. But I'm tired of talking about cheap tight ends that don't touch the ball because Theo Johnson's not going to be mentioned except for mentioning that I'm not going to mention Theo Johnson this week. But before we head into our GPPs, make sure to like and subscribe. We have a like goal out there. Devin led off the top of the show. I think 225 likes, and it will give you out a jersey of your choice. And all you have to do is reply and guess the amount of DraftKings points for Deshaun Watson. So do that. Make sure to check out all the other great content on the Audible channel here with the OGs. We got Bob Harris, we've got Sigmund, we've got everybody that Cecil and Matt Waldman, everybody that you've come to know and love here at footballguys.com. So make sure to check that out. And then also head to footballguys.com/plans. Check out our different plan tiers that we have. We have the GOAT tier now, and you can join the GOAT tier and you can get special concierge service if you join the GOAT tier. But we'll go into GPPs and we'll do quarterback plays on GPPs. Phil, how are you differing on quarterbacks for GPP relative to cash?
I'm paying up. This is where I'm going to play some Kyler Murray. I'm definitely going to play some Lamar Jackson. I think you want Jackson in games where the Ravens are going to be pushed to score, and I think that's going to happen this week against Dallas because it's when he takes off running the most. We kind of saw that play out last week. The Raiders, Baltimore was just kind of playing with them for a while, and Jackson wasn't really looking to break contain. And then late in the game, when he absolutely had to, he started to. But I think he'll be forced to a little bit earlier this week, and he could easily run for 100 yards and throw for a couple of touchdowns and be the guy that you need in GPPs. In terms of raw projected fantasy points, he's my QB1 on this slate. Jared Goff, I'll go back to the well. He disappointed me last week and cost me a good amount of money. He went and messed up his home road splits that had been really juicy for years with a poor game in Detroit. But the Lions offense, I mean, they do look kind of awkward for whatever reason this year. They're not exactly the same. But I have to believe that they will figure it out because they've got all the same pieces. This game is going to be played indoors, so it's not like Goff is going to like Lambeau in December just because he's on the road. It's the highest scoring game on the slate in terms of implied total, and we're getting the side that fewer people are playing because I think Kyler Murray is going to be pretty popular this week. So I'll take Goff and the Lions, and then the only other name I had on my list at quarterback, I think Devin mentioned in cash, and I was going to kind of run it by Devin because I'm not sure if it's even okay at this point. But Deshaun Watson is 5,500, and our site projections actually have him as the top point per dollar quarterback on the slate based on our early projections. That would lead me to believe that I should be playing Deshaun Watson. I don't have the stones to play him in cash, but I made a tournament lineup with him last week in what I thought was a good matchup. He's got the Giants this week. That's definitely a good matchup. If he could get on the same page with Amari Cooper, I wouldn't rule out a big
It's
game.
entirely how Cooper plays. I mean, Watson played a lot better than what his stat line will tell you last week. He should have had, I don't know, 250, 260 yards. Should have had at least a touchdown. Like there were some critical errors by Cooper. And then the team kind of just, I don't know, grinded out the win when they didn't like. It seemed like they were confident that Trevor Lawrence wasn't going to move the ball against them, and kind of just grinded it out in the fourth quarter. It was a really fast paced game, so I think it's more than fine as a GPP play. You just know what you're getting in Watson, where his floor is, it's relatively low, and it's always been that way. He's never been the guy that's going to put up 350 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. You're going to have to get a rushing touchdown. You're going to have to kind of just accumulate points through various different measures. But 250 and 30 or 40 rushing with a rushing touchdown, he could certainly get that. And if he does, then at 5,500 or whatever he is, it's not all that hard to hit GPP value.
Devin, are those your plays as well? Or are you looking at different directions?
I like some of those guys. Brock Purdy is a guy that I'm looking at 6,000. And, we talked about Ayuk, we talked about Kittle, we talked about how bad this Rams defense is. Purdy threw for 317 yards last week. Nobody really likes to play Brock Purdy in GPPs, largely because they think he's just a game manager, which somebody is, somebody isn't. He's better than that. But he's certainly a guy that can come out and throw for 300 yards and throw for 3 touchdowns, and his stacking options are pretty easy. What happens, again, we'll go back to last week. What happens if Jordan Mason gets hurt early on? Well, all of a sudden they're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit because they don't really have any other running backs in that offense because Elijah Mitchell and Christian McCaffrey are both out. So, and Kyle Shanahan was talking about their other running backs are not really looking all that great. So it's Jordan Mason's offense. But if something happened to him, and right now I'm projecting Purdy to be 3%. So if there's a 20%, let's say there's a 10% chance that Mason gets injured, which is about the running back chance in a given week. Maybe that's a little bit high, but 1 in 10 games they'll typically go down or at least leave early or be hobbled. I think Purdy would then have massive upside that you would want to target. Looking at, I think Lamar is a great call. I mean, this team is 0-2. He plays better in these big matchups. They have to win this game. The only other guy that I'll throw out there, no, I'm not going to do that. Let's just move on.
Dak Prescott, 6,600. I think when you look at the Cowboys can't run the ball, and Baltimore, the way you're going to attack them anyways is through the air. We saw Gardner Minshew tear him up last week, and Gardner Minshew can tear him up, then I think Dak Prescott can tear him up. And you talk about Lamar Jackson there, that kind of gives you a pivot off of a lot of people playing Lamar Jackson in the similar type of back and forth matchup to potentially beat that shootout there. But I do like that Brock Purdy call, and you do talk about the stacking options being very easy. We mentioned him in cash too, but Geno Smith at 5,600. The way that Seattle had to come back a little bit last week, I think week 1 they played it a little bit close to the vest because they knew Bo Nix wasn't going to beat them. I think week 2 they had to play from behind, and that opened up Geno Smith with DK Metcalf with Jackson Smith and Jigba, and there's some interesting things at play there, and especially if you want to bring it back the other way with a Devin Chan or another Dolphin, Tyreek Hill that can have explode for a big week. So I like
we're gonna do it.
Call too.
I'm gonna go with the guy that I said I wasn't gonna do. And if he wins me a GPP this week, I might have to dye my hair. Andy Dalton, 4,800.
There you go.
This defense stinks. And he threw for 364 yards and 2 touchdowns in his lone start last year. Las Vegas isn't that great of a defense. This could be like a 31-28 game where they just throw the ball, recharge the offense. It's not likely. God, I hope I win a GPP and have to dye my hair red. All right, let's move on.
Yeah, but I mean, you talk about the price on Deontay Johnson, and then we talked about Brock.
Get whoever you want.
Powers and tight ends. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting there. Yeah, let's move on to running backs. Phil, build out some running backs here for GPPs.
Yep. So we talked about Zamir White a little bit in the cash game section. For me, he's a tournament play. If it's ever going to happen for Zamir White, it's this week when the Raiders could conceivably control the game script against Carolina, who can't stop the run. I especially like him in lineups where you don't play Brock Bowers. That way you have some leverage on the field because Bowers is going to be pretty popular. Tony Pollard at 6,000, I think we also touched on in the cash game section. I like him a little bit better for tournaments. He hasn't been a bell cow exactly, but his workload share has been top half of the league among running backs. Last week, he had 22 touches to Tyjae Spears' 8, and Spears came out of that game dinged up. I think we're going to see a lot of rushing in this game between the Titans and the Packers. For the Titans, it's going to be because they've seen enough of Will Levis throwing passes. And then for the Packers, it's because they don't want to see Malik Willis throwing passes. So both of these teams are just going to run at each other. And I don't think that Green Bay is going to be able to impose their will on this Titans rush defense the way that they did against Indy last week. And that means Willis is going to be put in a spot where he's probably going to make some mistakes. I think that Tennessee is a good bet to cover the spread in this game. I think they're 3-point favorites because if Willis is making mistakes, then Pollard and the offense are going to be the ones taking advantage of the good field position. They're going to have more offensive possessions. And for GPPs, he's a big play threat. So I like him there. And last one for me is Jonathan Taylor. I got cute and played him last week, and he was low owned, which was fine. He came off the field in the fourth quarter because the Colts were playing catch up. And that wasn't something that I was expecting. I guess they don't trust him to pass block or something. And they had Goodson and even Trey Sermon on the field ahead of him in those hurry-up situations. The thing about this week is that I don't think the Colts are going to have those situations because that Bears offense has looked somehow or another, despite all the talent that they have there, it's looked abysmal. I don't know if it's offensive coordinator. I don't know if it's Caleb Williams' growing pains that one day we'll look back on and say, oh, man, remember when we thought Caleb Williams stunk, which I don't think he stinks, by the way. I think it has a little bit more to do with scheme and him adapting to the speed of the game. But I think he looks kind of fine. But I think Indy's going to win this game. I think they're going to win it by a significant margin. And that means that it is most likely a big game for Jonathan Taylor, who I don't think is going to be so popular.
Devin, I know you got something to say.
The name that I'm looking at, and I largely can't get away from, is Jahmyr Gibbs at 6,800. Arizona's defense looked good last week, and a lot of people are burned by it because everyone and their mother had Rams in their lineups, but maybe the Rams just aren't that good without Cooper Kupp and without Puka Nacua. So I'm not going to overreact to that one performance. This is a team that did struggle against Buffalo, giving up 34 points. A lot of that was on the ground with both James Cook and Josh Allen. So I think that this could be a game where Gibbs has a pretty high upside relative to his roster percentage, which is right now trending in like the 8 to 10% range, very similar to Jonathan Taylor. I know the matchup is horrible, and I don't like playing guys against this defense, but Aaron Jones at 5,900 just feels a little bit too cheap. Houston's run defense is probably the best in the NFL, and it's been that way since at least last year. They led the NFL in yards per carry in 2023. But if you look at it, they don't have like the all-pro guys. They have a bunch of guys that are running DeMeco Ryans' scheme, and they're really well coached. But Jones is a guy that only takes one carry, and he can certainly pay off that 5,900 price. If I think about him compared to like DeAndre Swift, he's $300 more, and certainly has more upside. He's $100 less than Zach Charbonnet, and is significantly better of a running back than that Michigan bum. Saquon Barkley is the last name that I'll throw out there. I mean, everyone's going to think about, hey, he's going to be popular. He's going to be 20-25% rostered, but he looked very good on Monday, except for that dropped pass. And he is running behind a much better offensive line than he ran behind in New York, which has always been his problem, that he would get hit behind the line or he couldn't find the hole. But once he gets in open space, he's dangerous. And the matchup it's okay. It's New Orleans' run defense isn't what it used to be, but it's inside, which is always should help for points. He's a guy that certainly has upside that could break the slate.
Bucky Irving, 5,100. Shad White, a little bit dinged up. Rashad White was dinged up, and you're playing the Denver Broncos, and we are the OG Tampa Bay Buccaneer Baker Mayfield show, and I feel like we've not mentioned Baker Mayfield here today, and Baker Mayfield is the number 2 quarterback in fantasy, but that Buccaneers offense is rolling a little bit, and I think that Bo Nix is the type that can put them in scoring position quite a bit. So Bucky Irvin kind of down there in a game that could get away from the Broncos a little bit. Derrick Henry, 6,500, going up against that Dallas defense that got shredded by Alvin Kamara last week. And that's one where, we saw them get shredded. And if you wanted to play maybe a pivot off of Lamar Jackson, if Lamar Jackson's coming in hot, then Derrick Henry could be in play there. And then similar to Devin talking about Jahmyr Gibbs, you want to play a pivot off of that. David Montgomery at 6,100 has potential to find the end zone multiple times in a potential shootout game there. So those are the only other ones that I was kind of have an eye on. But we wide receivers, maybe this is where I get to play Stephon Diggs angry against the Vikings.
Sure. Why not? It's fine. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they scripted something up particularly early for Diggs, because he hasn't been all that great so far. And that he's a very emotional player. The coaching staff has to know that. He has 2 touchdowns this year, both coming in the first game, but hasn't topped 40 yards. They get in the red zone, I think they're going to try and get him the ball, or at least a couple targets there, especially if it's a game where they have a little bit of a lead. So I don't hate it.
Who do you like? Your wide receivers?
I think the one guy that really pops to me, that compared to his roster percentage, and it's ugly. I mean, it's relying on a quarterback that we're not even sure he can throw the ball. But that's Tyreek Hill at 8,200, 8,400. Apologies. Nobody's going to want to play Tyreek Hill because everyone knows how bad Skylar Thompson is. But Tyreek Hill, it takes 1-2 plays, And could they get him involved in the short intermediate game, try and just get him out in space and target him frequently? I could see that being a game plan for this team where they know they're not going to be able to throw the ball deep. And let's just try and get the ball in Tyreek Hill's hands and hope he breaks one, because we don't know what else we're going to do with Skylar Thompson. Like I said, it's a bit of a narrative that, but would it surprise me if one of the best receivers in the league had 100 yards? No, I mean, it certainly wouldn't. And he's going to be, right now, he's trending to be less than 2% rostered, which, like, Tyreek Hill at 2%, it's almost just like a must play for me. Looking else, I mean, who else? Mike Evans, 7,200, I think is in a really good spot against Denver. Denver's defense has been good, but Godwin last week, so that means we're pivoting to Evans this week. I think that's how the Buccaneers work, or at least have in the past. I think Jamison Williams, 5,800, is one of the top GPP plays this week. I know he's going to be popular. I get it, but a lot of the focus is going to be on Amon-Ra St. Brown after his 100-yard performance last week. But I think he's in a really good spot. We talked about Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's also a really solid play. Quentin Johnston, 4,600. Who else? I'm not a believer in Ladd McConkey. I think if someone is going to emerge there, it's going to be Johnston. Going up against Pittsburgh, who they've looked good, but who have they really played? They played Atlanta, we'll see how good Atlanta is. But I think Johnston, if there's a guy who has upside for that Chargers offense, could be the guy. And then I talked about a little bit about Jerry Jeudy, 5,200, but I think Jeudy is in line for, if Cooper doesn't step up, they're just going to start throwing to Jeudy, and that's what they did against Jacksonville last week. He had 58 yards last week, I believe, was their leading receiver, and Cooper is surprisingly getting some love this week. I think it's probably because of the Deshaun Watson, like, I don't want to say hype, but like, people are opening up to playing Deshaun Watson, which is just hilarious because everyone in the world wanted him cut after week 1. But people are going to play him, and people are going to play Cooper as the stack. But I think that's wrong. I think it's really Jeudy this week.
Phil, do you have some pivots here? Or are you similar ballpark?
I do. The first one I've got as a leverage play on Seattle is Tyler Lockett, because I do expect the Seattle offense to be popular between Charbonnet and Geno Smith, and probably Smith and Jigba. But we're only 1 week removed from Lockett being the one that was outproducing Smith and Jigba back in week 1, where Lockett had 13.7 and Smith and Jigba looked like he was going to be invisible like he was last year. There's also a shot. I don't know how serious this is, but right before we came on, DK Metcalf, it was reported that he missed practice with a hand injury today. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, because if Metcalf is out, then I think both Lockett and Smith and Jigba are going to become really popular plays. But for now, I like Lockett as a GPP play relative to what I expect to be lower ownership. The other guy that I like is CeeDee Lamb at 8,800. So I had mentioned that I like that game to score some points. I like the Lamar Jackson play at quarterback. And I think because Jackson's best stacking partners are probably one of the tight ends who are relatively cheap, that overall stack comes in pretty cheap, and it allows you to play a guy like Lamb, who's almost 9K, 8,800, and then you could get the mid-range running backs and kind of get unique with your wide receivers in the 5K or 4 to 5K range to fill out the rest of your lineup. Speaking of which, what if Andy Dalton to Adam Thielen is still a thing? And what if there's a certain comfort level there that he doesn't have with Deontay Johnson, and all of a sudden Dalton starts peppering Adam Thielen again? I mean, stranger things have certainly happened.
I think Thielen's a better GPP play than Johnson is.
Yeah, I'd have to say so because I think most people are going to say, "Hey, Deontay Johnson's got a quarterback again. He's sub 5K. I'm going to play him." Where Thielen probably is kind of washed up at this stage of the game, but that doesn't mean that he won't command a lot of targets. He'll be in the area of the field that Andy Dalton likes to operate in for sure. And then other than that, I mean, one other name that's kind of a longer shot is Jalen Naylor at 4,400. I've been impressed with him so far. He's got touchdowns in both games. Sam Darnold really seemed to be looking for him last week. We know that there's an opening for targets behind Justin Jefferson with Addison and Hockenson out. Houston Minnesota game looks pretty solid, if unspectacular. But we know that Houston can put up some points and force Minnesota to have to throw the ball. Even if
Let's be
Jefferson
honest,
is
you just
healthy,
wanted to say the name.
it's a cool name. It's like a top 8 fan. Say it's up there with like Monterio Hardesty, but yeah, Jalen Naylor be fun to win a GPP with him in the lineup.
Devontae Adams at 7,600. We saw, I think that Gardner Minshew is kind of, he's underrated in the fantasy community because we can't actually play him in the fantasy community, but he gets the ball to his playmakers. And we saw that last week in that comeback win against Baltimore. Adams, I think, has some upside. There's one player in the NFL that has had double-digit targets the first 2 weeks of the season each week. Zay Flowers at 6,800. And I know, Phil, you'd mentioned the tight ends a little bit, but Zay Flowers has big playability. He's getting targeted a lot more than I think people realize. And so he's kind of lingering out there. And then George Pickens at 5,700. George Pickens he just missed a massive week last week against that's going against Patrick Surtain. And so that is in play because that's apparently the only player that the Steelers throw the ball to. So that might be one. And again, if Jordan Love does happen to play, Jaden Reed at 5,900, I think is really interesting if that happens. And even Christian Watson at 4,900 is interesting. Lastly, maybe Rome Odunze at 4,200 if you're kind of down at the bottom there against a Colts defense that doesn't scare me, but just saying. Tight ends. There anything out here, tight ends? We kind of mentioned about all the relevant names, I think, in our cash conversation, but I mean, you're playing, guessing maybe for a touchdown from somewhere, but I have my list pretty bared down.
Yeah, I mentioned that I like Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews in those Baltimore Dallas stacks, but I think they work as standalones too. That interior offensive line for Baltimore is a problem. One way that they tried to mitigate it in week one was to get the ball to Likely out in the flat and on these short routes and have him try to do some damage after the catch, and it really worked. And then they went away from it last week for whatever reason, and the offense stalled. I think they need to get back to that, get the ball in the hands of a guy who can make plays. And I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of overcorrected and Likely ends up being a good play. And then Mark Andrews at 4,800, it just seems like a wrong price for Mark Andrews based on all the years that we've been playing the game. And he was fine last week. He had his 4 catches for 51 yards. I don't think we should be surprised if he took a couple of visits to the end zone at fairly low ownership and a really low price. And then the other one I like for tournaments is Sam Laporta at 6,000. I had mentioned the Detroit offense being a little bit wonky, and Laporta's lack of involvement has probably been the wonkiest part so far. But if you're going to play that game from the Detroit side, I like doing it with Goff and maybe Gibbs, like Devin said, and then Laporta as the pass catcher at low ownership. And if he's the one that gets a couple of touchdowns this week, I think you could really move past the field in tournaments.
What do you got, Devin?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to add. I think you're kind of just hoping for a touchdown. I'll look at George Kittle as my top guy this week. Yeah. I mean, if I look at upside, he has probably the most clear upside of anyone on this slate at the position. With no Deebo Samuel, with no Christian McCaffrey. Again, it kind of goes back to I'm not predicting an injury, but like if Jordan Mason does go down, the receivers here are going to have big games.
Kittle's dinged up too, and I don't think he's in doubt to play.
He's always dinged up, though.
Yeah, he is. Well, he's a football player. That happens. But if he does miss, their backup tight end's a little bit different than it was in the past, because in the past they had like the Charlie Warner and Ross Dwelly, these like blocker types. Eric Sauber is a little bit more of a receiver than these guys, and with Debo Samuel out of the lineup and Chris McCaffrey out, if George Kittle did happen to sit, that's a deep name that kind of throw out there a little bit. But favorite stacks of the week, Devin, what's your favorite stack?
Favorite stack of the week. Let's go with. I'm going to go off the board. No, I'm not. Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith.
That's good. Phil, what do you got?
I do like that. I was going to throw that in there when we were talking about quarterbacks, but I like the way that Hurts was running without A.J. Brown there. I think he's going to be forced to do that more. He's as good of a tournament play as any quarterback this week, probably. My favorites, I think I already gave them away, but I like Lamar Jackson, Isaiah Likely with the CeeDee Lamb bring back, and I like Jared Goff, Sam Laporta. I guess one way that you could get even more unique with that than Goff, Gibbs, Laporta is if you do a two tight end lineup with Goff, Laporta, and McBride as the bring back. Um, he's heavily involved in that offense. I think he's going to have a multi-touchdown game soon-ish. You know, it's hard to say exactly when that's going to come, but it could be any week with the way he's utilized. So if Laporta goes off and McBride continues to build on what he's been doing from a usage standpoint, I think that's a unique way to stack a game that's going to be otherwise very popular.
Looking at the history between Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan wouldn't hesitate to run it up on Sean McVay if he could. And so you could run Brock Purdy, Jordan Mason, Brandon Ayuk, and even throw George Kittle too on there if you really wanted to, and still be able to do some creative things with your lineup and kind of go for a hyper load on the 49ers, just kind of steamrolling the Rams, which I think is very much in play. The other one I kind of like would be Gardner Minshew with Devontae Adams and with Brock Bowers, because we did see some hyper targeting there, and Minshew at 5,300 does open up some other things against a Panthers defense that's very, very exploitable. But Phil, that brings us to our favorite cheap play of the week. What's yours?
Yep, I also tipped my hand there a little bit earlier. I'm going to go with the Jordan Whittington breakout week, 4,200 on DraftKings. And that is a DraftKings only play because I think the full PPR has a lot to do with that.
Devin, it's Andy Dalton. I already know it is, but what do you got?
I do like Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton would be my favorite guy, but I'm just gonna throw a name out there. If you're looking to just play a guy 3,200, had 6 targets last week, none of them really all that valuable, but a couple in the red zone. Britton Covey, Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's fun.
It's a long shot, but at 3,200, even if he catches 5-6 passes for 30 yards, like, you could do worse.
Yeah, and mine's contingent play, but we're going to be monitoring Joe Mixon, and we're going to be monitoring Damian Pierce, and if they scratch, then Cam Akers at that value is just I think I'm throwing him in every lineup. But that's what we got for you this week. Devin, why don't you tell the people what they need to know for their slate?
Yeah, hit the like, get us to 225. We'll give away another jersey. And check us out over at Football Guys. I think we have a lot of coverage this year. We're getting into regular season form. These next couple weeks are some of the most fun as we think about DFS, because we're starting to learn about their roles in offenses. We're starting to get a little bit of injuries. It's right before the bye week start. So we have monthly subscription packages that are relatively affordable. And there's a lot of content to be consumed. So check us out.